My name is Saurabh, and today I'll be talking about how you can become a DevOps engineer. So I'll be discussing what all various tools and technologies and concepts that you need to master, which will set you on the path of becoming a successful DevOps engineer. So first, let's have a look at the agenda. So this is what we'll be discussing today. We'll begin by understanding who is a DevOps engineer. Is he the guy who writes the code, or is he responsible for deploying the application on the server? So what is exactly the role of a DevOps engineer? Then we'll also look at various job roles available in the market. For example, automation architect, release manager. So there are multiple roles in a typical DevOps team. We are going to discuss that. After that, I'm going to show you a complete roadmap of how you can become a DevOps engineer. And finally, we'll be discussing a couple of job descriptions to figure out what exactly does it take to become a successful DevOps engineer. So I hope you all are clear with the agenda. Let's start by understanding who is a DevOps engineer. Now, there's a very big misconception out there. Like, people basically think that a DevOps engineer is a guy who will write the code for an application, will also be responsible for testing the application, will also be managing the servers, will also go ahead and roll back if there is any failure. So that's not exactly what a DevOps engineer does, right? He is basically a person who understands the entire SDLC and has, the outright understanding of various automation tools for developing digital pipelines that we commonly call as CI/CD pipelines, right? Continuous integration and delivery pipeline. But still, who exactly is a DevOps engineer, right? Where what all people can go ahead and learn DevOps and become DevOps engineer, right? DevOps engineer works with developers and the IT staff to oversee the code releases, right? They're either developers who get interested in deployment and network operations, or either they are system admin, who have the passion for scripting and coding and move into development side, where they can improve the planning of test and deployment. So a DevOps engineer can be a developer, he can be a tester or an admin, right? He basically gets the 365-degree view of the entire software delivery lifecycle. So even if you are a fresher, you can always consider DevOps as an option. It's not something that you require a rich amount of experience. But definitely there are certain prerequisites, and then you should have mastery in all the DevOps tools and the various DevOps stages, and the underlying concept of DevOps is also very, very important. So there are a lot of skills that you need to master in order to become a DevOps engineer, right? So I hope we all are clear who is a DevOps engineer. I'll just repeat it again. DevOps engineers are the people who work with developers and the IT staff to oversee the code releases. They should ensure that everything is happening continuously. They are basically, they're responsible for maintaining those CI/CD pipelines, right? They are also required to architect a SDLC model that can automate a lot of redundant tasks, right? And they can be developers, they can be testers, they can be admins, or even a fresher, right? So it deals with the entire software delivery lifecycle, so it doesn't really matter which background you come from. So I hope you all are clear with who is a DevOps engineer. Now let us discuss a bit about the DevOps engineer job roles. So this is how a typical DevOps team looks like, right? So you have DevOps evangelist, experience assurance, code release managers, automation expert, software developer / tester, which is definitely different from the traditional software developer or a tester. And we also have security engineers, right? So let us start with DevOps evangelist. Now, DevOps evangelist, you can call him as a principal officer or a leader who's responsible for implementing DevOps in an organization, right? He's responsible for ensuring that DevOps strategy is implemented in the end-to-end development of the production and also bring about a positive difference in the environment. The DevOps evangelist also finds ways to improve the existing architecture of the product, keeping in mind the various automation tools and the skills of the devs and the ops team in the organization. Right, and I would say that the primary target of a DevOps evangelist is to manage other DevOps roles and obtain full efficiency from the team. Right, so he's basically a leader who understands DevOps and has pretty good amount of experience and can implement it successfully in an organization. Right. Now let's talk about release managers. Right, code release manager, release manager. So the one releasing new features and ensuring the post-release product is basically a release manager, right? So this role is a key player in the product deliverables because he needs to integrate the new updated features with the existing framework. And this role can either be the same guy assuming of the role of a release engineer or a release manager who is leading a team of release engineers. Right, so you can call it anything, but the work of a code release manager or a release engineer is to see that the product is successfully released in the market. It is deployed onto the production environment, and also maintain the stability and how it is doing in the market. So all those things is basically what a code release manager is responsible for. Now comes the automation automation expert. Now this guy is responsible for achieving automation and orchestration of tools. So DevOps is not all about automation, but automation plays a very big role in DevOps, right? And being an automation expert, this role should be able to understand what can be automated and how a product stack can be integrated with another product stack. Right, as I always tell people that DevOps is not only about various tools, it's about how you can use those tools to come that can give the maximum benefit to any organization, right? How and where you can use these tools, how will you architect an SDLC model. So the guy who's responsible for such tasks is basically an automation expert. It is also called as integration specialist, analyzes who basically analyzes, designs and implements strategies for continuous deployments. Although I wouldn't say that continuous deployment is a good practice, because a lot of companies may want to market their product before, or there might be certain other checks apart from UAT that few organizations prefer. So continuous delivery is something which is a good practice. Continuous deployment is still a debatable topic. Let's talk about software developer slash tester, right? So obviously the guy who develops the code and tests it, but the traditional coders and programmers fall under this bracket, but their responsibilities have changed a lot. Besides development, the professionals are also responsible for testing the code. And the designation may remain the same, but the new role of software developer or a tester dramatically increases the scope of responsibilities, as they are responsible not only for turning new requirements into code, but unit testing, deployment, and they have a role in ongoing monitoring as well, because they understand the code better than anyone, right? Finally, we're going to talk about quality assurance, and after that we also have security engineer. Quality assurance is a guy who ensures the quality of the product is conforms to its requirement. This is a new role, I would say, in DevOps, which actually guarantees the good experience to the user, right? It's not only about testing the product, it's about how will be the user experience. It is often called as experience assurance. So this role is a step beyond traditional testing and quality checking. This role is basically always in the lookout for opportunities to improve any and every feature to bring customer satisfaction. So it's pretty different from a traditional QA team. It's more about experience of a user. How can that become better? Finally, we're going to talk about security engineer. Now, before I talk about security, I would say that probably after a couple of years, you might see that in the name DevOps might have evolved to DevSecOps, because security is also a very important component of DevOps, right? And the security engineer is always monitoring the product security and health. Security engineers are also as important as any other role, right? Because they are the ones monitoring the deliverability of the product. They work side by side with developers, embedding their security. They also monitor the system to check its performance, report if there is any downtime, right? So we have multiple tools for that, but you need security engineers as well, right? And they also figure out what has caused that particular problem. So their responsibility is to prevent any downtime or security risk from happening again, and that's the key task of a security engineer. So I hope you guys have understood what are the various job roles, how a typical DevOps team basically looks like, right? Let's go ahead, and we are going to focus on how you can become a DevOps engineer, right? And post that, we are also going to see the important skills that organizations look for in a DevOps engineer, right? So these are the 6 steps or 6 stops where post that you'll become a successful DevOps engineer. This will basically set you on the path of becoming a successful DevOps engineer. Let's have a look at each and every point one by one. We'll start with source code management skills. So you have to be proficient with at least one version control or source code management tool. I would say that you should consider Git, because it's basically a decentralized version control system. So you should have good hands-on knowledge of Git and Git workflows, right? How how you can prevent merge conflicts, and how basically you can go back to the previous commit. You can do a lot of cool things about with version control systems, and it's to make things continuous. It is very important to understand source code management, because if I want to go back to the previous version of the code, how will I do that? If I want to know, okay, this commit has caused the error, how would I know that? If I want to know who has made the last commit, and what was the commit message, at what time was it done, right? So I can get all of those things, and I can actually release my product in a more structured way if I understand source code management, or basically how Git and GitHub works. Right, it's one of the most popular source code management tool. Other tools I would say is Subversion, and then there's Bitbucket, so you can have a look at that also. But I would say Git and GitHub is the best for you if you're beginning your career, and you want to be you want to become a DevOps engineer. Next up, we need to understand how to integrate build tools and source code management tools for continuous build or continuous integration. So there's a very good example there in front of your screen. So what you need to understand is how you can configure your automation server, which can be Jenkins, which can be Bamboo, which can be Travis. Right, so there are multiple automation servers. I would say Jenkins is the best one because it comes with over 2,000 plus plugins for various development, testing, and deployment technologies. Right, so I would prefer Jenkins any day. When I talk about automation, right? So Jenkins is basically it has plugins that triggers various stages. Let me just give you a small example. So what you need to understand here is how you can integrate your source code management tool that you're using, probably Git and GitHub, and your automation server, such that every commit you can go ahead and build that. For example, if there are 3 developers and developer A commits a code to the source code, it should be such that Jenkins servers pulls that code and triggers any of the build tools, for example Maven or Gradle, and build it. When I say build, it includes compiling the source code, reviewing the source code, even unit testing it, integration testing it, and even packaging into an executable file. Right, so I would say unit testing and integration testing are part of build. That's a very common misconception, that build includes only compile. It includes unit testing as well as integration testing, code review, and a few other things as well, which varies from different, which varies based on your requirement, right? So this is what you need to understand, how you can integrate build tools with build tools like Maven with source code management tools like Git. Right, and how you can use Jenkins server to make that happen automatically after every commit, or probably after every 5 minutes. I mean, depends on the kind of requirement you have, but it has to be quite frequent, right? And this process is basically termed as continuous integration. Yes, I'm talking about developing continuous integration pipelines. To be honest, continuous integration is not enough. So next, what you need to learn is how you can take continuous integration to the next step, and you can include continuous testing, or I would say continuous delivery is what the term is for this particular process. So you need to understand how you can perform end user testing or user acceptance test, where you have to deploy your packaged application onto a dedicated test server and perform testing, functional testing there, right? So basically you need a good understanding of tools like Selenium. And at the same time, you should also be able to understand how you can provision your test servers, because it's a very common problem that the code works in the dev environment but doesn't work in the test or the prod environment, right? So to prevent such a situation, you can use multiple tools like Puppet, Docker, Ansible to provision your servers such that they are the replica of your dev environment, right? And there's a consistent computing environment throughout the software delivery lifecycle. So there are multiple tools available, so you should have good understanding of that. Probably, you can definitely consider Puppet and Docker. Puppet has a major market share when it comes to CM tools. It is a very mature tool. It is there since 2005, and a lot of companies use Puppet for managing their infrastructure. And at the same time, you need to understand how you can perform functional testing with the help of Selenium. But the major thing is it should happen continuously. It should happen after every commit. So you should understand how you can integrate that with your Jenkins server again, right? So this is what basically building a continuous delivery pipeline is. So I can see that a lot of you might be thinking, definitely you guys will be thinking there are a lot of things to study, but there are people out there who know DevOps and then are actually doing it, in their organization and have adopted DevOps practices. You can go ahead and check out few stats around the companies which have adopted DevOps, and I was recently going through an article and I saw that there are 81% of the enterprises who are using DevOps practices, along with 70% of small to medium businesses, which is quite amazing if you ask me. Right? It's a trending technology, and a lot of people are considering a career as a DevOps engineer. Next step is continuous testing, which we just discussed, and then now we are going to provision the dev test and prod environment, which I talked about in the previous step as well. But for that I was mentioning only the test server, but here you need to make sure that you have a consistent computing environment throughout the dev, test and prod environments. So you need to understand what is infrastructure as code. Basically it's writing code for infrastructure, but how are you going to do that, right? So basically you need to understand how Puppet, Chef and tools like Ansible or SaltStack works. Right, so basically you have to write the configurations at one single location and push that onto multiple nodes. There's one more way to do that by using Docker, which is there in the front of your screen. So basically you can write a Docker file which contains the requirements for your application, create an image, and you can upload that image anywhere where from there different teams can pull that image and build the exact same environment which was there in the developer's laptop. So, right, so it can be replicated throughout the SDLC. Sometimes you might have to configure your Docker containers also with the help of Puppet, which is or Chef or Ansible. So I would say Puppet, Chef, Ansible and Docker, so these tools are pretty trending, and I think you should always have good understanding of such tools if you want to become a successful DevOps engineer. Then monitoring, as I've told you, is a very important part of DevOps, right? So you should have good understanding of monitoring tools like Nagios or Splunk or Elastic Logstats Kibana, which is called as ELK as well. So you should have understanding of such tools, because small downtime can cause huge losses. We have seen that in past. So this is something that every organization look for in a DevOps engineer. Cloud platforms. So basically, every nowadays all most of the organizations have their infrastructure on cloud. Maybe it might be AWS, Linode, Azure, GCP, any cloud service provider. So you need to understand how you can implement DevOps practices on cloud, how you can create CI/CD, develop CI/CD pipelines on cloud, right? Now let's talk about DevOps job descriptions, right? So this is from Honeywell. Now before I begin, guys, let me tell you, for a DevOps engineer, the biggest prerequisite is scripting knowledge as well as Linux fundamentals. So these two things you should know before you think of before you even think about DevOps, because without scripting there's no automation. I think a lot of you will agree to that, right? So this is how a job description from Honeywell looks like. They require a person who has proficiency in scripting languages such as PowerShell, Bash or Python, right? They require knowledge on version control systems, and then should be proficient with concepts such as branching, code merge and things like that. Strong knowledge of cloud environment, as I've mentioned before as well. And DevOps has facilitated the implementation of microservices a lot, because earlier there was an architectural pattern called monolithic architecture, where everything was happening. There was just one single instance on which all the services were running. But with the help of microservices, an application can be broken down into smaller composable pieces, where they don't share data structures, but they communicate through APIs. Right, so there you might have to upgrade or deploy certain features for a particular service, but not for the entire application. So DevOps helps there as well. Right, so experience working with CI/CD implementation is a must. So basically, that's why you do DevOps, to create such digital pipelines that can ease up your the redundant work, that you don't have to do it again and again, basically. Let's move forward and have a look at one more job description from Headspace. They require good Linux knowledge, cloud and version control system knowledge, software containerization platform, and container orchestration experience. So that is also very important, because you need to understand how you can manage different Docker containers, right? A cluster of Docker containers. So for that, you might have to use Kubernetes, or you can even use Docker Swarm, so based on your requirement. But it is an added advantage if you know both, because both have their own pros and cons. Scripting knowledge is must definitely. Then continuous monitoring tools like Nagios, Splunk, or ELK. Knowledge of configuration management tools for basically infrastructure as code like Puppet, Chef, Ansible, SaltStack. Knowledge of automation servers like Jenkins or Bamboo or Travis for for CI/CD purposes, right? Now, if I come up list down few key takeaways from the DevOps job description that we saw. I would say it is very important for a DevOps engineer to understand Linux fundamentals and knowledge on one scripting language at least. I would say go for Python. Then infrastructure as code is a very important concept, right? Basically writing code for your infrastructure. For that, you need to understand tools like Puppet, Chef, Ansible. That helps in multiple ways. It can help you in rolling back to the previous stable version. It can help in providing a consistent computing environment. It can actually configure multiple nodes with just a click of a button. You just have to shoot that particular command, and with push configuration, you can go ahead and handle multiple nodes within few minutes actually, right? So companies are able to roll back within seconds, guys. So that's how important this concept is, infrastructure as code. Then cloud experience and DevOps key concepts definitely you should understand, because implementing the DevOps practices on cloud is what industries look for. Nobody have their infrastructure on premise. They usually prefer cloud service providers like AWS, GCP, or Azure. Communication and collaboration with others, which I think you should have generally, even if you don't want to become a DevOps engineer. This is something that's going to help you in whatever you do. Basically, it's going to help you. Continuous integration and delivery pipelines, you should have experience with that. You should be able to develop and maintain such digital pipelines, and knowledge of various DevOps tools and technologies. So you should understand how these various development, testing, and deployment technologies work, how you can integrate them, how you can automate things, and how you can use those tools and come up with a solution that is best for your organization. So again, I'm saying it's not only about the knowledge of tools, it's about how and where you can use these tools. All right, so by this I come to the end of today's session, and have a basically good evening, guys.